I knew my marriage was over the moment Blake walked in, whistling Vivaldi, reeking of Chanel No. 19, and dropped his briefcase on my antique entryway table like nothing had changed. "I slept with my boss," he said, teeth gleaming. "I don't regret it." I spooned another bite of my mother-in-law's lasagna into my mouth and wondered if I should offer him seconds. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The kitchen was spotless, as always. Every surface gleamed under the pendant lights I'd carefully selected 3 years ago when we renovated. The marble countertops reflected Blake's smug face as he leaned against the island, waiting for my reaction. His tie was slightly askew, burgundy silk with tiny gold dots that I'd bought him for our anniversary. How fitting that he'd worn it to confess his betrayal. "Jane Whitmore," he continued, rolling her name around his tongue like expensive wine. "You know, Richard's wife, the one with the trust fund and the tennis lessons." He paused, studying my face. "We've been seeing each other for 3 months. Started at the Morrison retreat in Denver. One thing led to another in the hotel bar, then her room, then my office, then her car in the parking garage." I took another bite of lasagna. The ricotta was perfectly creamy, the meat sauce rich with herbs. Blake's mother had taught me this recipe during our first year of marriage, back when she still believed her son had married well, back when I believed I had too. "Are you going to say something, Kennedy?" Blake's voice carried that familiar edge of irritation. He hated when I didn't react according to his script. 20 years of marriage, and he still expected me to perform on cue. "This is delicious," I said, gesturing with my fork. "Want some? There's plenty left." His face darkened. "Did you hear what I just said? I'm having an affair with my boss. I'm in love with her." "I heard you." I stood and walked to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of Pinot Grigio, the same brand we'd served at our wedding reception. "Wine?" Blake stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "What the hell is wrong with you? I just told you I've been cheating, and you're offering me dinner and drinks?" I poured myself a generous glass, letting the silence stretch between us. Through the kitchen window, I could see the Hendersons' house across the street. Their lights were on, and I caught a glimpse of Janet Henderson in her kitchen, probably preparing her own family dinner. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that my world had just imploded with the casual cruelty of a man who thought his honesty was a gift. "I'm processing," I said finally. 20 years of marriage, Blake. 20 years of believing you when you said you were working late, traveling for business, attending those weekend conferences. 20 years of being the perfect wife, hosting your colleagues, ironing your shirts, pretending not to notice the lipstick stains and perfume that wasn't mine. "You knew?" For the first time, uncertainty crept into his voice. "I suspected. There's a difference." I took a sip of wine, savoring the crisp taste. "But I never imagined you'd be stupid enough to confess, or arrogant enough to think I'd thank you for your honesty." Blake straightened his tie, regaining his composure. "Jane and I are getting serious. She's talking about leaving Richard, and I want to explore what we could have together. You and I, Kennedy, we're more like roommates than spouses." "When's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time you looked at me like you actually wanted me here?" The question hung in the air like smoke. When was the last time? Before the miscarriages, certainly. Before the years of trying and failing to have children while Blake grew increasingly distant. Before I threw myself into my work at the regional library system, building a career that mattered while he chased promotions and younger women. "You're right," I said, and watched relief flood his features. "We are like roommates. Roommates who split expenses, share household duties, and maintain basic respect for each other's property and feelings. Apparently you've forgotten how that arrangement works." I finished my wine and rinsed the glass in the sink. The simple domestic action felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life through a window. This morning, I'd been Kennedy Hart, head librarian and devoted wife. Tonight, I was Kennedy Hart, woman scorned and plotting revenge. "I'm going to shower," Blake announced. "We can talk more about this tomorrow. Figure out the logistics." "Logistics?" I repeated. "Like I'm a business merger you're dissolving." He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Kennedy, I didn't mean—" "Go shower, Blake. Wash off Jane's perfume. Tomorrow, we'll definitely discuss logistics." After he left the kitchen, I sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the water run through the pipes above my head. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Victoria. "Wine night tomorrow? I have news about the Patterson case." Victoria, my brilliant, ruthless lawyer sister who'd built her career destroying men who underestimated women. I typed back, "Rain check. I have news too." The shower stopped running. I heard Blake's footsteps in our bedroom. My bedroom, I corrected myself, and the familiar sounds of his nighttime routine. Teeth brushing, face washing, the creak of the bed as he settled in to sleep peacefully after destroying 2 decades of my life. I opened my laptop on the kitchen table and created a new document. At the top, I typed, Project Silent Storm. Blake thought he held all the cards. He had the affair, the confession, the ultimatum. He probably expected tears, begging, desperate attempts to win him back. He'd calculated that I'd be grateful for his honesty, compliant in whatever arrangement he'd worked out with his precious Jane. He'd miscalculated? I began typing, organizing my thoughts into categories. Financial, social, professional, legal. Under each heading, I listed Blake's vulnerabilities, his dependencies, his assumptions about my compliance. 20 years of marriage had taught him to take me for granted. Those same 20 years had taught me exactly how to dismantle his comfortable life piece by piece. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight. I'd been planning for 2 hours, and my document had grown to 4 pages of detailed strategies. I saved the file in a password-protected folder and closed the laptop. In the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection. 40 years old, auburn hair showing the first threads of silver, green eyes that Blake used to say reminded him of sea glass. I looked tired but not broken, angry but not desperate. "Hello, Kennedy," I whispered to my reflection. "Time to remind everyone who you really are." I brushed my teeth with methodical precision, applied my night cream, and set my alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow would be a busy day. I had phone calls to make, accounts to review, and a war to begin. At 3:30 a.m., I was still awake, staring at the ceiling while Blake snored beside me. His sleep was deep and untroubled, the sleep of a man who'd unburdened his conscience and expected the world to accommodate his choices. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the kitchen. My laptop beckoned from the table, but instead I reached for my phone. Victoria would be asleep, but I could leave a message. "V, it's me. Breakfast at 7 tomorrow. Bring the papers we discussed last year, the ones I said I'd never need. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. Oh, and call Marcus. Tell him I'm ready to start those training sessions we talked about. I have a feeling I'm going to need all the strength I can get." I ended the call and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at our quiet suburban street. In a few hours, the sun would rise on what Blake probably thought would be a difficult but manageable conversation about dividing assets and establishing new living arrangements. He was about to learn that Kennedy Hart, head librarian and devoted wife, was capable of things that would make Jane Whitmore's trust fund look like pocket change. The war was about to begin, and I intended to win. Blake stumbled into the kitchen at 7:15, hair disheveled and wearing his favorite weekend sweatshirt, the Northwestern one I'd bought him during our anniversary trip to Chicago. He stopped short when he saw Marcus Caldwell sitting at our breakfast table, methodically working his way through what was clearly Blake's usual Saturday morning: scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, and wheat toast with the expensive jam Blake special ordered from that place in Vermont. Marcus looked up and nodded pleasantly. "Morning, Blake. Hope you don't mind. Kennedy offered me breakfast after our workout." He gestured to his empty plate with a fork that looked tiny in his massive hands. "These eggs are incredible. What's your secret?" Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Marcus Caldwell was 6'4", 230 pounds of solid muscle, with the kind of presence that made rooms feel smaller just by existing in them. He'd been my personal trainer for exactly 12 hours, since Victoria called him at midnight, but Blake didn't know that. What workout?" Blake's voice cracked slightly. "Kennedy's been telling me about her new fitness goals," Marcus continued conversationally. "Very ambitious, very focused. I like working with clients who know exactly what they want to achieve." I emerged from the pantry carrying a fresh container of protein powder, wearing workout clothes that I'd ordered online at 4 a.m. with express delivery. "Blake, you remember Marcus from the gym, right? He's going to be helping me with strength training. I've decided I need to be stronger." The emphasis wasn't subtle. Blake caught it, his eyes darting between Marcus and me like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Kennedy, about last night..." The doorbell rang. Perfect timing, as always, from Victoria. I'd inherited my organizational skills from our mother, but Victoria had gotten the gift of dramatic timing from our theater-obsessed father. "That'll be my sister," I said brightly. "Marcus, would you mind getting the door? Blake seems a little overwhelmed this morning." Marcus rose from his chair with fluid grace, his movement economical and controlled. Blake pressed himself against the counter as Marcus passed, which was probably wise. My new trainer had the kind of quiet intensity that suggested he could press a small car without breaking a sweat. Victoria swept into the kitchen like she owned it, her red hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, carrying her leather briefcase and wearing the navy suit she reserved for particularly satisfying legal victories. She kissed my cheek, nodded politely to Marcus, and then turned to Blake with the smile she usually reserved for opposing counsel. "Blake, how lovely to see you. I trust you slept well?" "Victoria, what's going on here?" "Breakfast," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot I'd started at 6 a.m. "Would you like some eggs?" "Oh, wait." Marcus finished them. "There's cereal in the pantry." Victoria set her briefcase on the kitchen island with a decisive thunk. "Actually, Blake, I'm glad you're here. Saves me a trip later." She opened the case and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "Separation papers. Kennedy called me last night with the most interesting story about honesty and logistics." Blake's face went white. "Separation? Kennedy, we agreed to talk about this." "No," I interrupted, my voice calm and steady. "You talked about logistics. I listened. Now I'm implementing some logistics of my own." Victoria slid the papers across the counter. "Everything's standard, Blake. Division of assets, spousal support calculations, temporary living arrangements. I think you'll find the terms quite reasonable, considering." "Considering what?" "Considering that Kennedy has been extraordinarily patient with your extracurricular activities. Jane Whitmore isn't your first affair, is she, Blake?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. Marcus had returned from answering the door and was now leaning against the kitchen wall, arms crossed, looking like the world's most intimidating breakfast guest. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Victoria said crisply. "I'm stating facts. Jennifer Morrison from your office Christmas party 3 years ago, that conference in Atlanta where you lost your wedding ring, the business trip to Seattle that lasted 4 days longer than your calendar indicated." Blake's hands shook as he reached for the papers. "How did you—" "Credit card statements, Blake. Hotel receipts, phone records. 20 years of marriage means 20 years of joint accounts and shared technology. Did you really think Kennedy wouldn't notice the patterns?" I watched my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, scan the legal documents, his face growing paler with each page. "These terms. Kennedy, this is half of everything. The house, the retirement accounts, even the business investments. Washington is a community property state," Victoria said helpfully. 50-50 split is standard. Of course, if you'd prefer to contest it, we could always discuss your adultery in court. Public record and all that." Blake looked up at me, desperation creeping into his voice. "Kennedy, please. We can work this out. Jane and I, it's not serious. It's just..." "Just what? Just sex? Just excitement? Just a way to make yourself feel important?" I set down my coffee cup. "Blake, I need you to understand something. This isn't about Jane. This is about 20 years of disrespect, dishonesty, and taking me for granted. Jane is just the final straw." My phone rang. Blake's mother's contact photo filled the screen. A formal portrait from their family Christmas card, all pearls and disapproval. I answered on speaker. "Eleanor, how lovely to hear from you." "Kennedy, dear, I just heard the most disturbing rumor from Janet Henderson. She said Blake was seen at that new restaurant downtown with some woman who wasn't you. Please tell me this is just neighborhood gossip." Blake lunged for the phone, but Marcus smoothly intercepted him with one massive hand on his chest. "I wouldn't," Marcus said quietly. "Actually, Eleanor, it's not gossip. Blake confessed last night to having an affair with his boss. We're separating." The silence from the phone was deafening. Then, "Blake Andrew Hart, is this true?" Blake's voice came out as a whisper. "Mom? Don't you mom me, young man. Kennedy, dear, I am so sorry. I raised him better than this. Blake, you are no son of mine until you fix this mess." The line went silent. Blake stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed him. "Well," Victoria said cheerfully, "that went better than expected. Now, Blake, about these papers." "I need to call Jane," Blake said suddenly. "She'll understand. She'll help me figure this out." He pulled out his phone and dialed. We all listened as it rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. He tried again, same result. "Maybe she's busy," I suggested helpfully. "It is Saturday morning. Perhaps she's with her husband." Blake's third attempt also went to voicemail, his fourth, his fifth. Victoria and I exchanged glances. Phase 1 of Project Silent Storm was already in motion, thanks to a very early phone call to Linda Morrison, Jane's assistant, and the biggest gossip in Blake's office building. "Blake," I said gently, "you might want to check your email." He fumbled with his phone, his face growing increasingly frantic. "I can't. My work email isn't loading, and my keycard app shows an error message." "That's odd," Victoria mused. "Almost like your access has been revoked." The color drained from Blake's face. They can't fire me. I haven't done anything wrong. Adultery with a superior could be considered a violation of company ethics policies, I said, especially when that superior is the daughter of a board member. Companies tend to be very sensitive about potential sexual harassment lawsuits. Sexual harassment? Jane pursued me. Did you document that? Victoria asked with professional interest. Witnesses? Written communication establishing that you didn't abuse your position to coerce a superior into a sexual relationship? Blake's silence was answer enough. Marcus cleared his throat. Kennedy, I should probably head out. Same time Monday for our session? Absolutely. Thank you for breakfast company, Marcus. It's so nice to start the day with someone who keeps their word. After Marcus left, the kitchen felt smaller, but no less tense. Blake sat heavily in one of our breakfast chairs, still clutching his phone like a lifeline. My car, he said suddenly. Kennedy, where are my car keys? Probably wherever you left them. Why? He rushed to the garage, Victoria and I following at a leisurely pace. Through the window, we watched Blake discover that his beloved silver convertible, the one he'd insisted on buying during his midlife crisis 2 years ago, was no longer in the driveway. It's been repossessed, I explained as he returned, wild-eyed. Turns out when you miss 3 payments, the bank gets impatient. 3 payments? I haven't missed any. He stopped. The joint account. Which I closed yesterday morning. Don't worry, I made sure all our actual bills were paid first. Mortgage, utilities, insurance. You know, the important things. Blake sank onto the garage steps. Kennedy, this is insane. You can't just destroy my entire life in one day. I'm not destroying anything, I said calmly. I'm simply removing my support from your lifestyle choices. 20 years of my salary contributing to our joint accounts, my credit score backing your loans, my name on your insurance policies. You wanted independence, Blake. Congratulations. You're independent. Victoria checked her watch. I hate to break up this touching moment, but I have a tennis match at 9. Blake, you have 72 hours to review those papers and respond. After that, things get considerably less friendly. She kissed my cheek again. Lunch tomorrow? I want to hear all about this new fitness routine. After Victoria left, Blake and I stood in the garage, surrounded by the detritus of our shared life. Garden tools, holiday decorations, boxes of books I'd been meaning to donate. 20 years of accumulation that would need to be divided, cataloged, split down the middle like everything else. This isn't over, Blake said finally. You're absolutely right, I agreed. This is just the beginning. You wanted honesty, Blake? Here's some honesty for you. I'm going to dismantle your comfortable little world piece by piece, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. I walked back into the house, leaving him sitting on the garage steps with his phone and his separation papers. Through the kitchen window, I watched him eventually stand up, brush off his sweatshirt, and walk down the driveway toward the bus stop. Blake Hart, who hadn't taken public transportation in 15 years, was about to get reacquainted with the city transit system. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. Project Silent Storm was ahead of schedule. The red dress had been hanging in my closet for 2 years, tags still attached. Blake had called it too bold when I'd tried it on at Nordstrom, said it wasn't appropriate for a librarian. I'd bought it anyway, telling myself I'd find the right occasion eventually. Tonight was the right occasion. Morello's buzzed with the usual Saturday evening crowd, couples celebrating anniversaries, business associates closing deals over wine, and the entire social hierarchy of our suburban community on display. I'd specifically requested Table 12, the corner booth that Jane Whitmore had claimed as her regular spot every Saturday for the past 6 months. The hostess, a young woman named Jessica who'd helped me with research at the library, smiled knowingly as she led me through the restaurant. Word traveled fast in our town, especially when it involved scandal. Mrs. Hart, your guest is already here, she said, gesturing toward the booth where Richard Whitmore sat nursing a glass of what looked like very expensive scotch. Richard stood as I approached, and I was struck again by how different he was from Blake. Where my husband was all flash and charm, Richard possessed the quiet confidence of old money and older dignity. He was 52, silver-haired, with a kind of understated elegance that came from never having to prove anything to anyone. Kennedy, he said, kissing my cheek in greeting, you look absolutely stunning. That dress is remarkable. Thank you. I've been saving it for a special occasion. Revenge is always special, he said with a slight smile, pulling out my chair. I took the liberty of ordering champagne. Dom Perignon 2012. I thought we might have something to celebrate. As if on cue, our server appeared with the bottle and 2 flutes. The pop of the cork drew attention from nearby tables, and I felt the weight of curious stares. Perfect. To wives who know their worth, Richard said, raising his glass. To husbands who remember theirs, I replied. and we clinked glasses as half the restaurant watched. The champagne was crisp and perfect, bubbles dancing on my tongue like tiny celebrations. Through the restaurant's front window, I could see Blake's face pressed against the glass, Jane beside him, both of them staring at our table with expressions of shock and fury. "They can't get in," Richard observed casually. I may have mentioned to the management that they were no longer welcome here. Something about disturbing other patrons with their public displays of affection. I watched as Blake gestured frantically at the hostess, who shook her head firmly and pointed toward the bar area. Jane's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment as they were escorted to a small table near the kitchen, the restaurant equivalent of Siberia. "You've been busy," I said to Richard. "Not as busy as you, apparently." Linda Morrison called me yesterday with some fascinating information about company email systems and security protocols. Linda Morrison, Jane's assistant and the unofficial keeper of office secrets. I'd called her Friday morning with a simple proposition: the complete email thread of Blake and Jane's affair, including timestamps, hotel receipts, and some particularly graphic messages, in exchange for a glowing recommendation letter for the graduate program she'd been trying to get into. "Linda's a bright girl," I said. "Very thorough, very detail-oriented. Very motivated to find a new job, apparently. Something about wanting to work for people with better judgment." Our appetizers arrived, oysters for Richard, the butternut squash soup for me, and I savored the first spoonful while Blake and Jane huddled at their exile table, their voices carrying just enough for nearby diners to catch fragments of what sounded like an increasingly heated argument. "The board met yesterday," Richard continued conversationally. "Emergency session. Seems there were some concerns about workplace harassment and professional conduct. Jane's been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." "How unfortunate for her." "Indeed. Her trust fund has also been frozen, pending review by the family trustees. Moral turpitude clause, you understand. My father-in-law was quite specific about that when he established the fund. No money for family members who bring scandal to the Whitmore name." I nearly choked on my soup. "Moral turpitude clause? Oh yes. The Whitmores have been dealing with wayward relatives for generations. Jane's great-uncle lost his inheritance over a gambling scandal in the 1960s. Her cousin was cut off for that unfortunate business with his secretary in the 1990s. The family takes reputation very seriously." Across the restaurant, Jane's voice rose sharply enough to draw stares from surrounding tables. "Told me you were separated. You said she didn't care." Blake's response was too quiet to hear, but his body language screamed desperation. He kept glancing toward our table, his face cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine. "She's taking it well," Richard observed dryly. Our entrees arrived, lamb for Richard, the seafood risotto for me, and I was delighted to discover that Morello's had outdone themselves. The scallops were perfectly seared, the risotto creamy and rich with saffron. "This is delicious," I said. Jane always did have excellent taste in restaurants. Had being the operative word, I believe her car was repossessed this morning, something about missed payments and frozen accounts. I tried to look sympathetic and failed completely. These financial mix-ups can be so complicated. Especially when one's husband discovers that his wife has been using joint credit cards to pay for hotel rooms with her lover. The paper trail is quite extensive, apparently. Richard's voice carried just enough to reach the tables around us, and I watched as our fellow diners leaned in slightly, pretending to focus on their meals while obviously listening to every word. "The neighborhood has been buzzing," I said, matching his volume. "Janet Henderson mentioned that the Petersons are taking bets on how long Blake lasts at Morrison and Associates. I'd say not long. His presentation on Monday should be particularly interesting, given that his new supervisor received a rather detailed report about his extracurricular activities." Blake's phone rang loudly enough to disturb the entire restaurant. He answered it frantically, his face going white as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Jane grabbed the phone from him, her own face transforming from anger to horror as she heard whatever news was being delivered. "That would be Jane's father," Richard said calmly, cutting his lamb. "He's been trying to reach her all day. Something about her position on the Morrison and Associates board being re-evaluated." I excused myself to use the restroom, partly because I needed to touch up my lipstick and partly because I wanted to walk past Blake and Jane's table. As I approached, their conversation became audible. "They're completely ruined. My father won't even take my calls. The trustees have frozen everything, and now Morrison is talking about termination for cause. Jane, please, we can figure this out." "We? There is no we, Blake. You told me you were getting divorced. You said your wife was some boring librarian who wouldn't even care." I paused beside their table, pretending to adjust my purse strap. "Excuse me," I couldn't help but overhear. "Blake, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I care very much. In fact, I've never cared more about anything in my entire life." Jane looked up at me with undisguised hatred. "You vindictive person. You've destroyed everything." "I haven't destroyed anything," I said pleasantly. "I've simply stopped enabling it. There's a difference." I continued to the restroom, where I found Linda Morrison washing her hands at the sink. She looked up nervously as I entered. "Mrs. Hart, Linda, you've been incredibly helpful. I hope the graduate program works out for you." "Thank you. I couldn't keep watching them treat people like that. Jane never respected anyone, and Blake, he thought he was so clever, sneaking around, lying to everyone. They deserved each other." "Past tense?" Linda smiled grimly. "Jane threw her engagement ring at him about 10 minutes ago. Hit him right in the forehead. Security had to intervene." When I returned to the table, Richard was signing the check. I thought we might leave before the entertainment gets too dramatic. Jane appears to be having what my grandmother would have called a moment. He was right. Jane was standing at their table, her voice rising to near shriek levels as she berated Blake, who sat with his head in his hands. Other diners were openly staring now, some holding up phones to record the spectacle. "Shall we?" Richard offered his arm, and we walked slowly through the restaurant, past Blake and Jane's table, past the staring diners, past the hostess who gave me a thumbs up as we reached the door. Outside, the evening air was crisp and clean. Richard walked me to my car, a perfect gentleman despite the circumstances. "Kennedy," he said as I unlocked the door, "I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of this. Jane made her choices, just as Blake made his. You're simply ensuring there are consequences." "Thank you, Richard. That means more than you know." "Would you be interested in having dinner again next week? Somewhere less dramatic?" I considered the offer. Richard Whitmore was attractive, intelligent, and apparently as committed to revenge as I was, but I wasn't ready for whatever that might lead to. "Ask me again in a month," I said, "when the dust settles." He smiled and kissed my cheek. "I'll do that." As I drove home, I passed Blake walking along the sidewalk, his shirt wrinkled, his tie missing, looking like a man who'd lost everything in a single evening, which I supposed he had. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Saw the photos on Facebook. The red dress was perfect. Coffee tomorrow?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I have updates." At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Project Silent Storm was exceeding all expectations. Blake's professional reputation was in tatters, his affair partner had publicly humiliated him, and his comfortable life was crumbling piece by piece. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I had 3 more weeks of carefully planned destruction ahead of me, and Blake Hart was about to learn that 20 years of marriage had taught me exactly how to hurt him where it mattered most. The war was far from over. Monday morning brought news that spread through our suburban community like wildfire. Jane Whitmore had been terminated from Morrison & Associates for conduct unbecoming, and Blake Hart had been demoted to junior consultant, a position typically reserved for recent college graduates and career changers. I learned this delicious information while sipping coffee at the Starbucks near the library, where Janet Henderson couldn't wait to share the gossip she'd gleaned from her husband's golf partner who worked in Morrison's accounting department. "They cleaned out Jane's office on Sunday," Janet whispered, leaning across the small table like we were conspirators. "Security escort and everything. And Blake? Oh, honey, they moved him to a cubicle in the basement. He went from corner office to the mailroom level in 1 weekend." "How unfortunate," I murmured, though inside I was doing victory laps. Linda Morrison had outdone herself with the email distribution. According to Janet, every employee at Morrison & Associates had received a system-wide security alert that included enough details about Blake and Jane's affair to ensure it would be the topic of conversation for months. "There's more," Janet continued, her eyes bright with the thrill of being first with scandalous news. "Richard Whitmore bought out Jane's father's shares in the company. Apparently he's now the majority stakeholder. Can you imagine the board meeting where that was announced?" I could imagine it perfectly, and the mental image was delightful. At the library, I threw myself into work with renewed energy. The regional budget meeting was next week, and I'd been preparing a presentation about expanding our digital literacy programs. But first, I had a phone call to make. "Victoria Hart, attorney at law." My sister's voice was crisp and professional. "V, it's me. How do you feel about going into business together?" "What kind of business?" "Wine distribution, specifically targeting the country club and tennis club market. I think there's a real opportunity for a woman-owned company that understands what affluent suburban women actually want to drink." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "This is about more than wine, isn't it?" Everything's about more than it appears to be. Are you interested? Send me a business plan. If the numbers work, I'm in. By noon, I'd drafted a comprehensive proposal for Hart Sisters wine distribution, complete with market analysis, startup costs, and projected profits. The beauty of the plan was that it was actually viable. I'd been researching the wine distribution market for months, initially as a way to understand Blake's business trips to Napa Valley. Now I knew exactly which vineyards he'd claimed to visit while actually spending weekends with various women. My afternoon was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Blake appeared in my office doorway looking haggard and desperate, wearing a wrinkled suit I didn't recognize and carrying a coffee-stained briefcase that had seen better days. Kennedy, we need to talk. I'm at work, Blake. Make an appointment. This is important. Please. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, noting how he seemed to have aged years in just a few days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his skin had a grayish pallor, and his hands shook slightly as he set down his briefcase. I made a mistake, he began. A huge mistake. Jane and I, it's over. She blames me for everything that's happened, says I ruined her life by not being honest about our marriage. Imagine that. Someone being upset about dishonesty. Blake flinched. Kennedy, I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Blake. Angry is what I was 3 days ago. Now I'm focused. Focused on what? On building a life without you in it. On remembering who I was before I spent 20 years making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. On discovering what I'm actually capable of when I'm not wasting energy on someone who doesn't deserve it. Blake leaned forward desperately. I lost everything, Kennedy. My job, my car, my everything. Jane won't even take my calls. Her father had me banned from their country club. I'm staying in a motel room that costs $40 a night, and I'm taking the bus to work like I'm 22 years old again. And I realize now that you were the best thing in my life. I threw away 20 years of marriage for what? A few months of excitement. It was stupid and selfish, and I'm sorry. I studied his face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse versus simple regret at getting caught. Blake, do you remember our 10th anniversary? The question clearly confused him. Yes, we went to that restaurant downtown. No, we didn't. You canceled because Jane's father was in town and you had to work late. I spent the evening alone, eating takeout Chinese food and watching old movies. When you came home at midnight, you said you'd make it up to me, but you never did. Kennedy, do you remember the miscarriage? The second one? His face went white. Of course I remember. You remember that it happened? Do you remember holding me while I cried? Do you remember coming with me to the follow-up appointments? Do you remember anything other than being inconvenienced by my grief? Blake's silence was answer enough. You didn't lose everything, Blake. You lost the illusion that you could have everything. There's a difference. After he left, I sat in my office feeling oddly empty. Part of me had hoped for something more from that conversation. Genuine accountability, real remorse, some sign that 20 years of marriage had meant something to him beyond convenience and comfort. Instead, I'd gotten exactly what I expected. Self-pity and manipulation disguised as apology. My phone rang. Victoria. I got your business plan. It's brilliant. When do we start? How about tonight? I have some ideas about our first marketing campaign. That evening, Victoria and I met at a wine bar in the trendy part of downtown, far from our suburban neighborhood and its gossip networks. We claimed a corner table and spread out papers like we were planning a military campaign. The tennis club market alone could support our first year, Victoria said, reviewing my financial projections. And if we can get exclusive contracts with a few country clubs. I already have meetings set up, I said. Richard Whitmore is introducing me to the procurement managers at 3 clubs this week. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Richard Whitmore is being very helpful. Richard Whitmore is a businessman who recognizes a good investment opportunity. Is that all he is? I considered the question. Richard was attractive, intelligent, and shared my current interest in systematic revenge, but I wasn't ready to think about him as anything more than an ally in my war against Blake's comfortable assumptions about the world. For now, I said finally. We spent 2 hours refining our business plan, identifying target markets, and discussing logistics. By the time we left the wine bar, Hart Sisters wine distribution was more than just a concept. It was a fully formed business strategy that could actually work. Wednesday brought more delicious news via the suburban gossip network. Blake had been seen at the grocery store using coupons and shopping the marked-down produce section. Jane had moved back in with her parents, a humiliation that apparently ranked just below public execution in her social hierarchy. But the real triumph came Thursday morning when I received a call from Linda Morrison. Mrs. Hart, I thought you should know. Blake's presentation to the Morrison board yesterday was memorable. Oh? He was supposed to present the quarterly sales analysis, but somehow the wrong PowerPoint got loaded. Instead of sales figures, the board got treated to a slideshow of his personal emails, including some very detailed messages about his relationship with Jane. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. How did that happen? Technical difficulties, Linda said innocently. These computer systems can be so unreliable. Anyway, Mr. Morrison called it the most unprofessional presentation in company history. Blake's been placed on probationary status. After Linda hung up, I sat in my office laughing until tears ran down my cheeks. Blake's technological incompetence, which I'd been covering for throughout our marriage, had finally caught up with him in the most spectacular way possible. Friday evening, I was organizing files in my home office when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Blake approaching the house, but something was different. His usual confident stride had been replaced by the shuffling walk of a defeated man. He rang the doorbell like a stranger, which I supposed he was now. "Kennedy, please, just 5 minutes." I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "What do you want, Blake?" "I want to come home. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this." "Live like what?" "Like a failure. Like someone people whisper about and laugh at. Like someone who threw away the best thing in his life for nothing." I looked at my husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not enough to change my mind, but enough to soften my voice slightly. "Blake, you can't come home because this isn't your home anymore. It's my home. You can't fix this because it was never actually broken. It was just built on a foundation of lies and assumptions that I'm no longer willing to accept. Kennedy, and you can't undo 20 years of taking me for granted just because the consequences are finally uncomfortable for you." I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving Blake standing on the porch that he'd helped me paint 3 summers ago, back when I still believed we were building something together instead of just maintaining his comfort. Through the window, I watched him walk back to whatever car he was driving now, probably a rental or borrowed vehicle, and drive away into the gathering darkness. Project Silent Storm was approaching its final phase, and Blake Hart was about to learn that some storms don't pass. They just keep getting stronger. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. Perfect weather for the tennis tournament at Hillcrest Country Club. I'd been looking forward to this day for weeks, not for the tennis, which I played adequately but without passion, but for the audience. Everyone who mattered in our social circle would be there, including several people who'd been conspicuously absent from my life since news of Blake's affair became public knowledge. Victoria picked me up at 9, looking elegant in her white tennis dress and carrying the new racket she'd bought specifically for this occasion. We weren't just playing tennis today. We were making a statement about the Hart women and our ability to thrive in the aftermath of Blake's spectacular self-destruction. "Ready for your debut as a single woman?" Victoria asked as we pulled into the club parking lot. "I've been single for years," I replied. "I just didn't realize it." The tournament was a charity event benefiting the local literacy foundation. Ironic, considering my profession, but I'd signed up months ago when Blake was still pretending to be a devoted husband. Now, as we walked through the clubhouse, I felt the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations following in our wake. "Kennedy!" Jennifer Morrison approached us near the registration table, her smile bright but cautious. Jennifer was Linda Morrison's sister-in-law and had been part of our social circle for years, though she'd been notably absent from recent gatherings. "I wasn't sure you'd still be participating." "Why wouldn't I be?" I asked pleasantly. "Well, with everything that's been happening, I just thought you might want to keep a low profile for a while." Victoria stepped closer, her lawyer instincts activated. "Why would Kennedy need to keep a low profile? She's not the one who was caught cheating." Jennifer's face flushed. "Of course not. I just meant—" "You meant that women are supposed to disappear when their husbands embarrass them," I said, my voice carrying just enough edge to draw attention from nearby conversations. "Hide at home and wait for the scandal to blow over. Is that what you meant, Jennifer?" The silence that followed was delicious. Jennifer looked around desperately for support, but found only interested faces waiting for her response. "I should go find my partner," she mumbled, fleeing toward the courts. "One down," Victoria murmured. "How many more fair-weather friends do you need to educate today?" As it turned out, quite a few. The morning was a parade of awkward encounters with people who'd been part of our social circle for years, but had apparently decided that Blake's infidelity somehow reflected poorly on me. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. False sympathy, barely concealed curiosity, and thinly veiled suggestions that I should be more discreet, more understanding, more willing to work things out for the sake of appearances. By lunch break, I was thoroughly sick of playing the role of wounded wife seeking sympathy and understanding. That's when Blake arrived. He looked better than he had in days, showered, shaved, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that I recognized from our closet. Someone had clearly coached him on his appearance, probably his mother, who had a talent for damage control when it came to her son's mistakes. Blake made his way through the crowd like a politician working a room, shaking hands and making small talk with people who'd been gossiping about him all morning. The performance was impressive in its audacity. "Kennedy," he said when he finally reached our table on the clubhouse terrace, "you look beautiful. Tennis always was your sport." "Blake, I'm surprised to see you here. Don't you have to work today?" His smile tightened slightly. "I took the day off. I thought we might talk." "We've talked. You've said everything you need to say, and I've heard everything I need to hear. Please, just give me a chance to explain." "Explain what? How you've spent the last 3 years lying to me? How you convinced yourself that I was too boring and predictable to notice or care about your affairs? How you actually believed I'd be grateful for your honesty when you finally decided to confess? The conversations around us had quieted, and I realized we had an audience." "Perfect." Blake's face reddened. "Kennedy, this isn't the place. This is exactly the place. You wanted to make our private business public when you started flaunting your affair around town. You wanted everyone to know how exciting and desirable you were, how you'd found someone more sophisticated than your boring librarian wife. Well, congratulations, Blake. Everyone knows." I stood up, my voice carrying across the terrace. "They know that you're a middle-aged man who threw away 20 years of marriage for a few months of ego-stroking. They know that you were so careless with your lies that even your lover's assistant could document your entire affair. They know that you're now living in a motel and taking the bus to your demoted position at a company where you're a laughingstock." The terrace was completely silent now. Every conversation stopped. Every face turned toward our table. "But what they don't know," I continued, "is that I'm grateful. Grateful that you finally showed me who you really are. Grateful that you freed me from the exhausting job of pretending our marriage was something worth saving. Grateful that I can finally stop making myself smaller to accommodate your ego." Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Kennedy, I'm not finished. You came here today thinking you could charm your way back into my good graces, convince me to take you back, restore your comfortable life at my expense. But here's what you need to understand. I don't want you back. I don't want to work things out. I don't want to go to counseling or therapy or whatever other performance you think might win me over." I picked up my tennis racket and walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of him. "What I want is for you to sign the divorce papers, take your half of our assets, and disappear from my life completely. What I want is to never again have to pretend that your happiness is more important than my self-respect. What I want is to build a life that doesn't include making excuses for your behavior or managing your emotions or cleaning up your messes." Blake stared at me like he'd never seen me before, which I supposed he hadn't. "And if you ever show up at my house again, call me at work again, or approach me in public again, I will have you arrested for harassment. Are we clear?" Blake nodded mutely. "Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tennis match to win." The applause started slowly. One person clapping, then another, then the entire terrace erupting in cheers and applause. I walked through the crowd toward the tennis courts, my head high, my spine straight, feeling lighter than I had in years. Victoria caught up with me at the court entrance. "That was magnificent. Remind me never to get on your bad side." "You won't," I said, adjusting my grip on my racket. "You're not Blake." We won our match in straight sets, then won our semifinal match, then found ourselves in the tournament finals against Jennifer Morrison and her partner, a woman named Carol whose husband worked with Blake at Morrison and Associates. The irony was perfect. As we took our positions for the final match, I could see Blake in the crowd, still sitting at the terrace table where I'd left him, staring at the court like he couldn't quite process what had happened. The match was closer than our earlier games, but Victoria and I had something our opponents lacked: the absolute determination that comes from knowing you're fighting for more than just a tennis trophy. We won 6-4, 7-5, and as we shook hands at the net, Jennifer Morrison leaned close to me. "I'm sorry about earlier," she said quietly. "You were right. I was being awful." "Thank you," I said. "That means something." The trophy presentation was held on the clubhouse terrace, with the entire tournament crowd gathered around. As I accepted the first-place trophy, I looked out over the faces of people who'd known me for years, but were seeing me clearly for the first time. "I'd like to thank my partner Victoria for an excellent day of tennis," I said into the microphone. "And I'd like to thank everyone here for reminding me that the best victories are the ones you win for yourself." More applause, and then the crowd began to disperse. Blake was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, he'd finally gotten the message. As Victoria and I packed up our gear, Richard Whitmore appeared beside our table. "Congratulations on the victory," he said, "both the tennis and the other thing." "Thank you. It feels good to win." "I imagine it does. I wanted to let you know that Jane filed for divorce yesterday. Apparently her parents made it a condition of her moving back home." "How is she handling it?" "About as well as you'd expect. There was some drama involving thrown dishes and threats to sue everyone involved in her downfall. Her father had to hire security for their house." I felt a small pang of something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. Jane had made her choices, just as Blake had made his. "Kennedy," Richard continued, "I know you said to ask you again in a month about dinner, but I was wondering if you might be interested in a business lunch next week, and I have a proposition that might interest you." "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that involves expanding Hart Sisters wine distribution beyond the local market. I have some connections in Seattle and Portland that might be useful." I looked at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. "Call me Monday," I said. "Let's talk." As we drove home, Victoria and I rehashed the day's events, laughing about Jennifer Morrison's discomfort and Blake's stunned expression during my speech. "You know," Victoria said as we pulled into my driveway, "I think this is the first time I've seen you truly happy in years." She was right. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like myself, not Blake's wife, not the patient victim of his infidelity, not the woman who made herself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. Just Kennedy Hart, tennis champion and wine entrepreneur, building a life that belonged entirely to her. Inside my house, not our house, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Hart Sisters. Wine distribution had received 3 new inquiries while I was at the tournament, including one from a distributor in California who'd heard about us through Richard's connections. Project Silent Storm was officially complete. Blake's comfortable life lay in ruins, his reputation was destroyed, and his assumptions about my compliance had been shattered in the most public way possible. But more importantly, I had built something new from the wreckage, a business, a future, and a version of myself that I actually liked. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. Monday morning brought the kind of autumn rain that makes everything look gray and defeated. I watched it streak down my office windows while reviewing the final divorce papers Victoria had delivered that morning. Blake had signed everything without contest, probably because he'd finally realized that fighting me would only make his situation worse. The phone rang as I was initiating the last page. Linda Morrison's voice was breathless with excitement. "Mrs. Hart, you need to know, Blake's been fired. Not demoted, not suspended. Fired. Security escorted him out this morning with a cardboard box and everything." "What happened?" "He tried to sabotage the Morrison account presentation on Friday. Changed numbers in the financial reports, deleted files, even tried to corrupt the backup drives. But our IT department caught everything. Mr. Morrison called it corporate sabotage and had him terminated immediately." I set down my pen, genuinely surprised. In all my careful planning, I'd never imagined Blake would be stupid enough to actually commit a crime. "There's more," Linda continued. "Jane's been telling everyone who'll listen that Blake promised to leave you months ago, that he led her on and ruined her life. She's threatening to sue him for emotional damages." After Linda hung up, I sat in my office trying to process this development. Blake's self-destruction had accelerated beyond even my most optimistic projections. I'd planned to dismantle his comfortable life piece by piece, but he'd apparently decided to finish the job himself. My afternoon was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Not Blake this time, but his mother, Eleanor Hart, looking every inch the disapproving matriarch in her navy suit and pearls. "Kennedy, dear, we need to discuss Blake's situation." "Eleanor, I appreciate you coming, but there's really nothing to discuss. The divorce papers are signed, the assets are divided, and Blake is no longer my responsibility." Eleanor's expression hardened. "He's living in his car, Kennedy. My son is sleeping in his car in a Walmart parking lot because he can't afford the motel anymore." The information hit me like a physical blow. I'd wanted to hurt Blake, to make him understand the consequences of his actions, but the image of him sleeping in his car was more pathetic than satisfying. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "But Blake made his choices. He chose to have an affair, chose to confess in the cruelest possible way, chose to try to manipulate me into accepting his behavior. Those choices have consequences. He made mistakes, yes, but this vendetta you're pursuing." "Vendetta?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Eleanor, I filed for divorce and took half of our assets, which is exactly what the law allows. Everything else, his job loss, his relationship problems, his financial difficulties, those are the natural consequences of his own actions. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Kennedy, I know my son. He's weak and selfish, and he makes terrible decisions. But he's not evil. This level of destruction, it's going to break him completely. For a moment, I felt the weight of what I'd set in motion. Blake's affair had hurt me deeply, but his current situation was genuinely tragic. Was I responsible for how far he'd fallen? Then I remembered the casual cruelty of his confession, the years of lies and disrespect, the way he'd expected me to be grateful for his honesty while he planned his future with another woman. Eleanor, Blake had 20 years to treat me with basic respect and consideration. He chose not to. He had multiple opportunities to be honest about his unhappiness or his affairs. He chose not to. He had the chance to handle our separation with dignity and maturity. He chose not to. I'm not responsible for the consequences of his choices. After Eleanor left, I tried to focus on work, but my concentration was shattered. The image of Blake sleeping in his car kept intruding on my thoughts. Had I gone too far? Was there a difference between justice and revenge? At 5 o'clock, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove to the Walmart where Eleanor said Blake was staying. I found him in the far corner of the parking lot, sitting in a 10-year-old Honda Civic that I didn't recognize. He was reading something by the dome light, probably job listings or apartment rentals, and he looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. I knocked on the passenger window. Blake looked up startled, then rolled down the window. Kennedy, what are you doing here? Your mother came to see me. She said you were living in your car. Blake's face flushed with shame. It's temporary, just until I find something more permanent. Blake, this is insane. You have family, friends. Do I? My mother won't let me stay with her because she's embarrassed. My friends won't return my calls because they don't want to be associated with the guy who got fired for sabotage. Jane's parents had me banned from their neighborhood. Even my old college roommate won't talk to me. I studied his face in the dim light. He looked exhausted, defeated, genuinely broken in a way that should have felt satisfying, but instead made me feel hollow. Why did you try to sabotage the Morrison presentation? Blake laughed bitterly. Because I was angry. Because I wanted someone else to hurt as much as I was hurting. Because I thought if I could make the company fail, somehow that would prove that firing me was a mistake. That's not how any of this works, Blake. I know that now. I know a lot of things now that I should have known months ago. We sat in silence for a moment, the rain pattering on the car roof like tiny accusations. Blake, I want you to understand something. I never intended for you to end up homeless. I wanted you to face consequences for your actions, but this, I gestured at the car around us. This isn't what I wanted. What did you want? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. I wanted you to understand what you'd thrown away. I wanted you to realize that actions have consequences. I wanted you to feel some fraction of the pain and humiliation you'd caused me. Mission accomplished, Blake said quietly. But mostly, I continued, I wanted to remember who I was before I spent 20 years making myself smaller to accommodate your ego. And I wanted to build something that belonged to me. Blake nodded slowly. Hart Sisters Wine Distribution. I heard about it from Jennifer Morrison. She said you're expanding to 3 states. 4, actually. We just signed a contract in Colorado. I'm proud of you, Kennedy. I know that probably doesn't mean much coming from me, but I'm proud of you for building something real. The admission surprised me. In 20 years of marriage, Blake had rarely expressed pride in my accomplishments. Thank you, I said. That does mean something. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching other cars pull into and out of the parking lot. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware of the small drama playing out in the far corner of the lot. Blake, I'm not going to offer to take you back. That part of our lives is over, and it should be over, but I don't want you living in your car either. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Marcus, it's Kennedy. I have a favor to ask. Do you know anyone who needs a roommate? Someone who wouldn't mind sharing space with a guy who's getting his life back together? After a brief conversation, I hung up and turned back to Blake. Marcus has a friend named David who's looking for someone to split rent on a 2-bedroom apartment. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe and affordable. I'll give you his number. Blake stared at me like I'd performed a miracle. Kennedy, why would you help me? Because 20 years of marriage should count for something, even if it wasn't what either of us thought it was. Because you're not evil, just selfish and weak. And because I'm not the kind of person who wants to destroy people, even when they deserve it. I wrote David's number on a piece of paper and handed it through the window. Blake, this is the last time I'm going to help you. After this, you're on your own. But I believe you can figure it out if you actually try. Kennedy, don't. Don't thank me or apologize or make promises about being better. Just try to be better. For your own sake, not mine. I walked back to my car, leaving Blake sitting in his Honda with David's phone number and what I hoped was a chance to rebuild his life into something less destructive. The rain had stopped by the time I got home, and the evening sky was clearing to reveal the first stars. Inside my house, I poured myself a glass of wine from Hart Sisters' latest acquisition, a small vineyard in Oregon that produced the most amazing Pinot Noir, and called Victoria. "How did the final papers go?" she asked. "Signed and filed. The divorce will be final in 30 days. And how do you feel?" I considered the question while watching the stars appear one by one outside my kitchen window. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in 20 years, I feel completely free." "Good, because I have news about the California distributor. They want to meet with us next week about an exclusive contract that could double our revenue." We talked business for another hour, planning our expansion strategy and discussing the logistics of scaling up our operation. Hart Sisters. Wine distribution was becoming more successful than either of us had dared to hope, and the future looked bright with possibilities. After Victoria hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the comfortable silence of my own space. No one else's needs to consider, no one else's moods to manage, no one else's lies to pretend I believed. Just Kennedy Hart, entrepreneur and survivor, building a life that belonged entirely to her. The storm had ended, and I was still standing, not just standing, but thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. Blake would figure out his own path forward, or he wouldn't. Jane would rebuild her life, or she wouldn't. But I was done being responsible for other people's choices and their consequences. I had my own future to build, and it was going to be magnificent.